Max Verstappen may have dominated the United States Grand Prix, but Red Bull once again found themselves surrounded by controversy. Just minutes before lights out, a Red Bull mechanic entered a restricted grid area and touched Lando Norris's grid marker, an action that led to a €50,000 fine from the FIA. Although the team called it a misunderstanding, critics argue it shows once again how far Red Bull is willing to push the rules. The victory might have strengthened Verstappen's title hopes, but the real question now is, did the FIA go too easy on Formula One's most powerful team? Max Verstappen's Austin weekend was close to perfect on track. Sprint win on Saturday, Grand Prix win on Sunday, and a meaningful cut into the championship gap. But the decisive storyline outside the lap charts came from the grid minutes before lights out, when the FIA fined Red Bull €50,000 for a breach of start procedure rules, half of it suspended for the rest of 2025. Here's what the stewards established. After the cars pulled away for the formation lap, a Red Bull team member re-entered the gate well area at Gate 1 in proximity of the second grid position, the slot used by Lando Norris. Marshals were already closing the gate. According to their report, the individual did not appear to react to efforts to stop him entering. The stewards wrote that entering or hindering preparations after the grid is cleared is absolutely prohibited, and that delaying the process must be considered as an unsafe act, warranting a significant penalty. The context for the approach matters. McLaren had applied a small strip of tape on the grid wall near Norris's box, a visual reference to help him align the car precisely given limited cockpit sightlines. Sky Sports reported that the Red Bull mechanic attempted to peel off that reference tape. Removing tape in itself is not illegal, but re-entering the restricted area after the field rolled for the formation lap is. That's the crux. Not what was touched, but when and where a team member went. Red Bull accepted the ruling and framed the episode as a misunderstanding around grid box markings. Before the written verdict was published, team principal Laurent Mekies said they had reviewed video with the FIA, calling it something we can do better in the future, while stressing they did not feel they had ignored specific instructions. The stewards nonetheless concluded that any person affiliated to a team should be aware of the prohibition after the grid is cleared. They suspended €25,000 of the fine to deter repetition. Crucially, Verstappen's result stood, because the infraction happened prior to the start sequence and involved a procedural/safety breach. Rather than car legality or sporting advantage during the race, the sanction targeted the team through a fine rather than altering the competitive outcome. The stewards also noted the grid prep safety angle. Gate closures exist to give marshals and photographers a protected zone to clear equipment and personnel. Hindering that process, even briefly, is the risk. On track, Verstappen did what champions do: remove drama with pace. He converted pole into victory and, paired with Saturday's sprint win, closed his deficit to Oscar Piastri to roughly 40 points with 5 rounds to go, including 2 more sprints. Norris finished second after a late pass on Charles Leclerc. Piastri took 5th. For a title race that had looked settled in August, the points swing in Texas put pressure back on McLaren and restored a sense of jeopardy to the run-in. The tape episode added heat to an already simmering McLaren-Red Bull rivalry. In the sprint, McLaren's double DNF at Turn 1 amplified the stakes for Sunday. The grid area confrontation, however brief, fed the perception battle between two camps that have been matching each other on pace and poking on the margins. It is worth separating perception from the written record, though. The FIA's findings focus narrowly on safety procedure, not intent to interfere with a rival's start performance. From the operations side, the ruling leaves 2 practical takeaways for teams. First, visual markers like paint dust, laser guides, or tape cues are common tools to help drivers hit the box precisely. They're permitted, but any interaction with them is tightly time-boxed by the grid clear procedures. Second, responsibility doesn't end when an individual claims they didn't hear or see a marshal's instruction. The steward's language makes clear the obligation is proactive awareness once the grid is cleared. That's why a fine, not a warning, was issued. McLaren's competitive picture from the race itself was solid. Norris recovered the place he lost at Turn 1, then managed the tires well enough to pressure Leclerc and make the move near the end. The The bigger loss was strategic rather than symbolic. While Norris banked 18 points, Verstappen's 26-point haul, 25 for the win, plus 1 for fastest lap, if applicable on the day, plus the sprint 8 made the weekend a net gain for Red Bull. In championship terms, Austin validated Red Bull's incremental updates and Verstappen's execution under heat and safety car rhythm changes. As for whether the sanction was lenient, the penalty sits within familiar precedent. Procedural/safety breaches in restricted zones typically draw team fines unless a direct sporting advantage is established. The Times and Reuters both emphasize the safety framing and the half-suspended element, a tool stewards often use to create a deterrent without escalating to points or classification penalties when the breach precedes the race start. Fans can, and will, argue proportionality, but the written justification tracks closely with the FIA's usual grid-clearing logic. It also lands in a broader 2025 story about margins. McLaren's mid-season surge forced Red Bull to seek gains everywhere: setup trims for tire deg, start phase repeatability, pit stop rhythm, and straight-line balance for defense. McLaren, conversely, has had to harden the softer edges, launch discipline after high-risk sprints, team order clarity, and cool-headed radio tone. Austin encapsulated that balance. Red Bull's on-track execution was unimpeachable. Its pre-start process earned a rebuke and a bill. McLaren's race was clean. Its Saturday left them with avoidable damage and no sprint points. So what changes from here? Expect ultra-literal compliance around the gate well and grid-clear language at upcoming rounds. Stewards quoted, "Hindering the safety measures to prepare the track for the race after the grid has been cleared is absolutely prohibited," which is as plain as sporting language gets. Teams will likely refresh briefings for mechanics assigned to last-minute grid duties and assign an explicit clear call role to comms so there's no ambiguity once the field rolls. Those are low-cost fixes that remove risk without affecting competitiveness. On Red Bull's side, Mackey's misunderstanding framing aims to close the loop without inviting a culture war narrative. The suspended half of the fine is the practical incentive. Any repeat would trigger the additional €25,000 and invite closer scrutiny. Given the title math, the last thing Red Bull needs is noise around processes it can control. Expect internal memos and a very dull, very compliant grid routine in Mexico City. For the championship, Verstappen's Texas sweep shifts the conversation from if to how quickly the gap can be erased with 5 rounds left. Norris's second places keep him in the hunt. Piastri's fifth slows his momentum, but preserves his lead for now. The next venue characteristics, altitude in Mexico, traction and energy deployment in Brazil, night race cooling in Las Vegas, will stress different strengths. If Austin was a statement weekend for Red Bull, the grid-fine coda is a reminder that titles are also about clerical perfection in the minutes before the visor drops. In short, Verstappen left Austin with maximum points. The FIA left Red Bull with a clear line in the sand on grid safety, and McLaren left with a fresh reason to tighten every part of its own pre-start routine. The steward's language is unambiguous, Red Bull's acceptance is on record, and the standings have tightened. Now the paddock moves to Mexico, with the fastest car of the weekend carrying more momentum and a slightly lighter wallet. So what's your take? Just an honest mistake, or proof that Red Bull keeps getting away with more than others? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to check out the next video on your screen.